I don't know how a man gets to 75 years old, spends 50 of those years cutting people open and putting them back together, and still can't see when someone is doing the same thing to him. I should have known. I should have seen it, but I didn't. And by the time I did, $380,000 was gone. And the woman sleeping in the bed next to me for 15 years had been a stranger every single night. Let me start from the beginning, not from where the pain is, from where the hope was, because that's the part nobody talks about. Everyone wants to hear about the betrayal. Nobody wants to hear about how good it felt before that, how real it felt, and if I skip that part, none of the rest of it makes any sense. I retired from surgical practice at 68, 31 years as a cardiothoracic surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. I had opened more chests than I could count. I had held beating hearts in my hands. I had told families their loved ones were gone, and I had told other families they were going to be fine. I had lived inside other people's crises for 3 decades, and when I finally stepped away from the operating room for the last time, I had no idea what to do with the silence. My first wife, Patricia, had passed away 11 years before I retired. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 4 months from the day we found out. We had been married 26 years, and I had not handled her death well. I threw myself deeper into work. I operated more hours than I should have. I ate bad food at 2 a.m. in hospital break rooms and called that a life. My colleagues worried about me. My daughter Renee, who lives in Portland, Oregon, worried about me. I told everyone I was fine, and I believed it for a long time because I did not give myself the space to feel otherwise. When I retired, the silence finally arrived, and it was enormous. I sat in my house in Beacon Hill, a brownstone I had shared with Patricia, a house full of her pictures and her books and the smell of the candles she used to burn, and I felt the full weight of everything I had been outrunning. I was 68 years old. I was healthy, more or less. I had my pension, my investments, and the savings of a man who had earned well and spent carefully. I had my daughter, though she had her own life and her own children and lived 3,000 miles away, and I had nothing that felt like a reason to get up in the morning. A colleague of mine, Dr. Frank Berenson, had taken a medical volunteer trip to Southeast Asia the year before and would not stop talking about it. He said the Philippines had changed something in him. He said the people were warm in a way that Americans had forgotten how to be. He said the pace of life was different, slower, more human. I had smiled and nodded and privately thought he was having some kind of late life episode. But after 8 months of sitting in that Beacon Hill brownstone watching the same street through the same window every morning, I booked a flight to Manila. I went for 3 weeks. I told myself it was a vacation. A man who had never taken a proper vacation in 31 years was finally taking one. I told Renee. She was cautiously supportive. I flew into Manila, spent a few days there, and then made my way south to Davao City, because Frank had said the South was quieter, greener, more grounded. He was right. The moment I landed in Davao, I felt something ease in my chest that I had not realized was tight. I spent my first week just walking. I visited markets. I ate food I could not name. I sat in small restaurants and drank terrible coffee and watched the city move around me. I was a tall, gray-haired American man with good posture and careful eyes, and people were curious about me. Children waved. Shopkeepers asked me where I was from. It was the first time in years that I felt visible in a way that was pleasant rather than clinical. That is when I met Melinda Reyes. I was having lunch at a small restaurant near the Magsaysay Park, the kind of place with plastic chairs and a ceiling fan and a handwritten menu. She was at the next table with 2 women I assumed were co-workers, all 3 of them in light blue nursing scrubs. She dropped her phone, and it slid under my chair, and I picked it up and handed it back to her. She looked at me and smiled, and she said, "Thank you, Poe," which I later learned was a term of respect, and I said something completely ordinary like, "Of course," and she went back to her conversation, and I went back to mine. But she glanced at me twice before I left, and I noticed. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was 69 years old at that point, newly retired, grieving in ways I had not fully admitted, and I was romanticizing a glance from a woman half my age at a plastic chair restaurant in the southern Philippines. I paid my bill, I left, and I walked the waterfront for an hour, telling myself to be sensible. I ran into her again 2 days later at a pharmacy near my guest house. She was buying something at the counter and she turned and saw me and recognized me immediately, which surprised me. She said, "The man from the restaurant." I said yes. She asked if I was a tourist. I said something in between retired, traveling, trying to figure out what comes next. She laughed at that. It was a small, genuine laugh, not performative, not flirtatious in an obvious way. She said that was a very honest answer. I agreed that it was. We talked for 12 minutes outside that pharmacy. I know it was 12 minutes because I looked at my watch when she arrived, and I looked at it when we parted, and I remember thinking that it was the first real conversation I had had in months that had nothing to do with medicine, retirement planning, or whether I was eating enough vegetables. She told me she worked as a nurse assistant at a private clinic in the city. She had grown up just outside Davao. She was 38 years old. I did not ask her age. She offered it, casually, the way someone does when they are comfortable in their own skin. Before I fully understood what I was doing, I asked her if she would like to have coffee sometime. She paused for just a moment, not awkwardly, but thoughtfully, and then she said yes. We had coffee that Thursday at a small cafe near the waterfront. We talked for 2.5 hours. She asked me about my work and listened the way people rarely do, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually absorbing what I said, asking follow-up questions that showed she had heard the previous answer. I told her about Patricia. I had not planned to. It came out naturally in the conversation, the way grief does when someone makes you feel safe enough to let it surface. I told her about the years after, about throwing myself into surgery, about the silence of retirement. She listened to all of it without rushing me toward a resolution. She told me her own story slowly, in pieces, across several meetings over the next 10 days. She had grown up in a large family. Her father had passed away when she was young. She had put herself through a medical assistant program with the help of a local scholarship. She had worked at the clinic for 6 years. She had been in a relationship years ago that had ended painfully. She did not give many details, and I did not press. She lived simply, she said. A small apartment, a few friends. She sent money to her mother and 2 younger siblings in a nearby province when she could. By the time my 3 weeks were almost over, I was spending every evening with Melinda. We walked along the waterfront. We ate at the small restaurants she knew. She brought me to a Sunday market outside the city, where local farmers sold fruit and vegetables and handmade things, and I stood there in the Davao heat watching her bargain cheerfully with a vendor over a bundle of pandan leaves, and I felt something I was almost afraid to name. I extended my trip by 2 weeks. I told Renee. She was quiet on the phone for a moment. Then she asked if I was okay. I said I was better than okay, actually. She said that was good, but I could hear the careful thing in her voice, the thing she was choosing not to say. During those additional 2 weeks, Melinda and I had the conversation that changed everything. We were sitting on a bench near the park, late in the evening, and she said something quietly, without looking at me. She said she had not expected to feel like this. She said she was not someone who made things complicated, but she wanted me to know that what she felt was real, and that she understood if it was too strange, too mismatched, too much of everything that made sense against it. I held her hand. I said I was 70 years old and had not felt anything like this in a very long time, and that if we were both being honest with ourselves, then maybe that was worth something. She put her head on my shoulder. We sat there until the park was mostly empty. 6 months later, I came back to Davao. Over the following year, I made 4 more trips. Each one was supposed to be the last, and each one ended with me booking the next one before I even boarded the plane home. Melinda and I spoke every day on video call between visits. She was warm and consistent. She asked about my health. She remembered small details, that I preferred black coffee, that I had trouble sleeping when it rained, that the anniversary of Patricia's death fell in October, and that it was still a hard week for me. On that anniversary, she sent me a voice message, just a few quiet words, saying she was thinking of me and that it was okay to feel sad, and that she was glad I was not alone. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. but I was a man who had been very alone for a very long time, and kindness of that specific attentive quality has a particular power over a person who has been starved of it. I proposed to Melinda during my 5th trip, at a small restaurant in a part of the city I had come to think of as ours. I had a ring, a simple one, not extravagant, because she had once said she did not trust extravagance, that it always meant someone was trying too hard to convince you of something. I liked that about her. She said yes, without hesitation. She cried a little. I cried too, quietly, in the way men of my generation cry with great effort to conceal it and complete failure to do so. We married in Davao the following year. A small ceremony. A few of her friends, several people from the clinic where she worked, and her mother, a quiet, compact woman who embraced me warmly and called me Anak, which someone translated for me as a term of endearment, like calling someone your child or your dear. Renee did not come. She said she supported me but could not be there. I told her I understood. I did not fully understand. I brought Melinda back to Boston. She came on a spousal visa, which took several months and a significant amount of paperwork. She adjusted to Boston with the kind of quiet resilience that I had come to expect from her. The cold surprised her deeply. I bought her a proper winter coat, and she looked at the first real snowfall of her life with an expression I will never forget. Pure, unguarded wonder, like a child's face on Christmas morning. I remember standing at the window next to her and thinking that I was the luckiest old man alive. She continued her studies in the United States, taking courses toward a proper nursing certification. I supported this. It made complete sense to me. She was skilled, she was driven, and building her credentials in America was a natural next step. I paid the tuition. I paid for the books, the equipment, the additional certifications she said she needed to move from assistant to full nurse. I did this without hesitation and without tracking what was spent, because that is not how I thought about my relationship with my wife. We set up a joint bank account within our first year of marriage. I had suggested it because I believed in transparency between partners. I had seen too many couples in my medical years whose financial secrecy had poisoned their relationships in ways they never fully recovered from. I told Melinda that what was mine was ours, that I had enough for both of us and then some, and that I did not want money to be a source of tension or secrecy between us. She agreed. She said she had the same values, that secrecy around money was a form of dishonesty, and that she could not respect a relationship built on financial shadows. She said that. She actually sat across from me at our kitchen table in Beacon Hill and said those words. The first year of our marriage was good. It was genuinely good. I am not rewriting history to make the fall more dramatic. Melinda was a caring presence in the house. She cooked Filipino food on weekends and slowly learned the things I liked to eat during the week. She came to my follow-up appointments at the hospital. I had some cardiac monitoring of my own by then. The irony of a heart surgeon with a complicated heart was not lost on me, and she asked the right questions and remembered the answers. She communicated with Renee, carefully and without pressure, and over time Renee softened, though she never fully warmed. The second year was mostly good. There were moments that confused me, small moments. She received phone calls she took in the other room, and when I asked who it was, she said her mother, or a friend from Manila, or someone from the clinic back home asking for a reference for a younger colleague. I did not question this. A woman has a right to her own conversations. I was not the kind of husband who monitored phone calls. She started sending money home with more regularity in the second year. I knew about the remittances. She had told me from the beginning that she sent money to her family in Davao, and I had said that was fine, that family came first, and that she should let me know if the amounts ever became a strain. She said they were modest. She said her mother needed some help with medicine. She said one of her brothers had lost his job and needed temporary support. I said, of course, help them. I transferred what she needed directly into our joint account, from which she managed the remittances herself. In the third year, she asked if I would consider an investment. A piece of land in Davao, she said. Her cousin knew a developer. The price was reasonable, she said. Property in that area was appreciating. She said it could be a retirement safety net, something for us if we ever wanted to spend extended time in the Philippines, as my health required more careful management. She framed it as, Joint planning. She showed me papers that I now understand I should have had independently reviewed by a Philippine attorney rather than simply taking her word on their legitimacy. I transferred the funds. I did not think of it as giving her money. I thought of it as us making an investment together. By the 4th year, the remittances had expanded. Her mother's medicine costs were growing, she said. One brother's situation had not improved. Her younger sister had enrolled in college and needed support. There was a community emergency, I cannot remember which one now. They blur together in my memory, and she needed to send something immediately. I transferred. I always transferred, because I trusted her, because the sums individually felt manageable relative to what I had, and because questioning her felt like questioning us. I was not tracking the cumulative total. This is the thing I have the hardest time explaining to people. A man with my education, my years of institutional practice, my financial discipline in every other area of my life. I was not tracking the cumulative total of what I was sending through our joint account at my wife's direction. Because when you trust someone completely, you do not audit them, you just live. It was my accountant, Alan Marsh, who caught it. Alan had been managing my finances for 18 years. He was thorough and quiet, and he had a habit of calling me in October every year to review the previous 12 months before tax season arrived. He called me that October as usual, and he was quiet in a specific way I had not heard from him before. He said he wanted to go through some of the joint account transactions. He said he was seeing some patterns that he wanted me to understand and explain to him. I met with Alan in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. He had printed everything out, pages of it. He walked me through it slowly. Transactions, transfer dates, amounts, destination accounts. Some of the destination accounts were familiar. Some were not. Some remittances to Davao that I knew about. And then, below those, transfers to accounts I had never seen and never authorized. Not in the way of someone hacking a system. In the way of someone who had access and used it systematically, carefully, over a long period of time. I remember sitting in Alan's office with those pages in front of me and feeling something I had never felt in 31 years of surgery. Complete cognitive failure. My brain simply could not process what the numbers were telling me. Alan gave me a total, $380,000. Over roughly 11 years of marriage, $380,000 had moved from our joint accounts, my accounts, funded by my pension, my investments, my retirement savings through a combination of visible remittances, inflated investment funds, fabricated family emergencies, and transfers to accounts I had never known existed, all ultimately tracing back to destinations in Davao that Alan had partially mapped using what records he had access to. I drove home from that meeting in a state I do not have a clinical word for. I am a physician. I know the neurological experience of shock. I know what adrenaline and cortisol do to cognition and blood pressure. I was experiencing all of it. My hands were correct on the steering wheel. I stopped at every light. My body drove me home while my mind sat somewhere separate, trying to understand what it was being told. Melinda was in the kitchen when I got home. She was making dinner. She turned when I came in and smiled and asked how the meeting went. I looked at her and I said, very quietly, that I needed to talk to her. She looked at my face, and whatever she saw there made her stop smiling. We sat at the kitchen table. I placed Alan's printed summary between us. I did not yell. I was not capable of yelling at that moment. I simply asked her to explain it to me. I said that Alan had found transactions, significant transactions that I did not understand. I said I wanted her to help me understand them. She looked at the papers for a long moment, and then she did something I had not prepared for. She did not deny it. She did not perform confusion or outrage or accuse me of misreading the documents. She sat very still, and she looked at me and she said, very quietly, I know. Those 2 words dropped into the silence of our kitchen and changed the air. I asked her what she meant by that. I asked her to tell me everything, and she did, over the next 2 hours, at that kitchen table, in that low, even voice she sometimes used when she was very serious, the same voice she had used at our early conversations at the Davao waterfront, the voice that had felt like honesty to me, that I had trusted because it sounded like a person who had nothing to hide. She told me the money had not gone to her mother's medicine in the amounts she had described. Her mother was alive and well and not particularly ill. She told me the land investment had not been for a legitimate property development. She told me the brother who had lost his job had in fact found another job within 6 months of losing the first one. She told me the remittances had grown well beyond what her family actually needed. And then she told me the thing that undid everything. She told me she had another household in Davao. She had maintained it throughout our marriage. There was a man there, someone she had known before she left for the Philippines visa process, someone she had not ended the relationship with when she met me. They had 2 children together. The eldest was 9 years old. She had been pregnant with the first one while we were still in the early months of our marriage. I sat across from my wife of 15 years, and I listened to her tell me that she had been living 2 lives simultaneously, and that the financial machinery of our marriage, the joint account she had called a symbol of transparency, the remittances I had approved without question, the investments I had funded on faith, had been the engine of the other life, the one I did not know about, the one where she was not my wife, the one where she was someone else entirely. I asked her why she was telling me now, when she was clearly not telling me out of guilt. She had carried this for 15 years without guilt stopping her. She said because the accounts were tracked. She said because she knew what Alan finding those records meant. She said she was telling me now because the alternative was being told by a lawyer, and she did not want that. I asked her if she thought this was better. She looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw something genuine, not remorse exactly, but recognition that she was looking at a man she had genuinely hurt. Then it passed, and her face went neutral again, and she said she did not know if it was better. She said she was sorry. I do not know what to do with that apology. I have turned it over many times in the months since. I think she meant it in the narrow sense, sorry it happened this way, sorry I am here in this kitchen watching you process this. Whether she was sorry for the thing itself, for the 15 years of calculated performance, for the children she had with another man while sleeping in my bed, for the $380,000 that had quietly evaporated while I thought we were building something together, I genuinely do not know, and I have had to make my peace with not knowing. The weeks after that conversation were the strangest of my life, including the week Patricia died, including every crisis I ever managed on a surgical floor. There is a particular kind of devastation that comes from a betrayal that is also a revelation, not just that something was taken from you, but that the container you thought held your life was hollow. I walked through my house and I looked at 15 years of shared objects, photographs, furniture, the kitchen she had rearranged to a layout she preferred, the hooks she had installed by the door for her many coats, and I could not attach them to anything real. They were props. They had always been props. I just had not known I was in a play. Renee flew out. She did not say I told you so. She is a better person than that, and she could see clearly that it would have served no purpose. She sat with me in the kitchen, in the same chairs where the confession had happened, and she made me eat something, and she held my hand for a long time without saying anything. I was grateful for that. I was more grateful for it than I had been for almost anything in a long time. My health took a predictable hit in those weeks. My cardiologist, a former student of mine, which did not make the appointments any less humiliating, adjusted my medications and told me that stress of this magnitude was not something my heart needed, and that I should be very careful. He was right. I knew he was right, but there is no beta blocker for what I was experiencing. Alan and I engaged a Philippine-based attorney to assess what, if any, of the transferred funds were legally recoverable. The land investment had been partially legitimate in structure, but the amounts remitted had been inflated by a fabricated consultant fee that traced back to an account controlled by the man in Davao. Most of the remittances were simply gone, money sent across borders to support a household I never knew existed. Money that had fed and clothed and educated children who shared no blood with me, but who had been sustained by my life's work nonetheless. The attorney was realistic with me. She said recovery was possible in theory and nearly impossible in practice. The costs of legal pursuit would approach or exceed what could realistically be recovered. She advised me to consider what outcome I actually wanted and whether a drawn-out legal process in a foreign jurisdiction was the most productive use of whatever time and energy I had at 75. I told her I would think about it. I have been thinking about it. Melinda is still in Boston. We have not divorced yet. I know that sounds impossible to explain, and I have tried to explain it to Renee and to Alan and to my old colleague Frank Berenson, who listened to the whole story over the phone and was so quiet at the end that I had to ask if he was still there. I have tried to explain why I have not filed the papers, why we are living in the same house in a state of frozen and terrible clarity, why every morning I get up and make coffee and hear her moving in the room down the hall and do not do the thing that logic says I should do. I think the honest answer is that at 75, with my heart requiring careful management and my financial situation genuinely altered and my daughter 3,000 miles away, the binary of leave or stay has not fully resolved inside me. Not because I forgive her, I am not there. I do not know if I will ever be there. Not because I love her in the same way I look at her now and I feel mostly a strange, flat grief, like looking at a painting whose colors have all been drained, but because the shape of what comes after is not yet clear to me, and I have spent a lifetime not cutting until I knew exactly where I was cutting. I know some people will read that and think I am weak. I know some people will think I am still in denial, that I am still that man at the Davao restaurant watching a woman glance at him twice and telling himself he was being ridiculous but staying seated. Maybe they are right. I have had moments of absolute clarity in the months since the confession moments where I sat in my study in the early morning and saw the entire arc of what happened with the cold precision of a surgical diagram. Every manipulation labeled, every turning point identified, every red flag cataloged in retrospect with the bitter accuracy of hindsight. I was lonely, and I wanted to believe in something. She was skilled at becoming what lonely people wanted to believe in. She had done it before, I am certain of this now. The consistency of the methodology, the long patience of it, the way she let me feel seen and known before she asked for anything, the way she agreed with every value I named before using those same values against me: transparency, trust, family first. This was not improvised. This was a woman who understood exactly how to build a home inside someone's hope and then quietly furnish it with everything she needed. And I am a man who should have known better and chose, every single day, not to look too closely at the seams. There is a conversation I keep returning to. Early in our time together in Davao, before the proposal, before any of it, we were walking along the waterfront one evening, and she said something that I thought at the time was profound. She said that most people spend their whole lives being careful and still end up alone. She said that the only real risk worth taking was the one that opened you up rather than closed you down. I thought she was talking about the two of us. I thought she was saying something brave and true about the nature of love later in life. I understand now that she was reading me. She was identifying my fear of dying alone, of the years of silence that had preceded her, of closing myself off and calling it wisdom, and she was handing it back to me as a philosophy that would make me easier to trust. It was the single most effective thing she ever said to me. It cost her nothing. It cost me everything. I am not sure what I am going to do. I sit with that uncertainty the way I used to sit with difficult surgical decisions in the moments before an operation, not paralyzed, but very, very still. I am still the man who held hearts in his hands. I am still the man who trained other surgeons, who outlasted 50-hour shifts, who told families the hardest truths medicine had to offer with whatever steadiness I could give them. I am still that man. She did not take that from me, whatever else she took. But I am also a man who is 75 years old, sitting in a brownstone in Beacon Hill that is too quiet and too full of the wrong kind of memories, with a body that needs monitoring, and a bank account that no longer says what it said before, and a woman down the hall who knows every corner of his loneliness, and used each one of them with the precision of someone who had studied the blueprints. And I don't know yet how this ends. I genuinely don't. I know what the rational answer is. I know what any person sitting outside my life would tell me to do. But there's a difference between knowing a thing and being ready to do it, and at 75, I have earned the right to sit in that difference a little longer. The $380,000 is gone. I have accepted that. The money was real, but what hurts more is the math of time. 15 years. 5,475 days of believing in a life that was constructed around me by someone who understood exactly what I needed to believe. That is the number that I cannot make peace with yet. Not the dollars, the days. I pick up my coffee in the morning, and I look at the street through the same window I have looked through for many years, and I try to understand what it means to have been this wrong about this much for this long. I don't have the answer. I'm not sure the answer exists in a form I can hold, but I am still asking the question, which means I am still here. And some mornings, that feels like enough. Some mornings it does not feel like anything at all, and most mornings it feels like both at the same time, which is perhaps the most honest thing I can tell you. I was a surgeon for 31 years. I know what it means to work inside something fragile and try not to make it worse. I am trying to do that now. I am trying not to make it worse. I am not sure I am succeeding, but I am trying, and that is where I am. That is all I have to give you right now. A man at a window, a cold cup of coffee, and a silence that has a name I still can't quite bring myself to say out loud.